The orchard smelled of rot before it smelled of anything else, and Maya Bishop noticed that first, the way she noticed everything with her hands before her eyes caught up. Sweet decay, wet leaves, apples gone soft and brown on branches that should have been heavy with fruit by now. She stood at the wrought iron gate with her duffel bag cutting into her palm and counted the dead trees in the front row. 6 out of 10. The rest were dying slower, which was worse in its own way, like watching something bleed out instead of just falling. She had driven 4 hours from Ohio to reach this stretch of land outside the city, an orchard tucked behind stone walls that looked older than anything else on the property, and she had done it on a rumor passed through 3 people at her old agricultural extension office. A Korean businessman had bought failing farmland and was letting it die because he did not know the first thing about soil. Maya knew soil. She had grown up with dirt under her fingernails, had gotten her degree in horticulture while everyone told her orchards were a dying industry, and she had spent the last 2 years proving them wrong one small contract at a time. This orchard was bigger than anything she had worked on before. It was also, according to the same rumor, owned by a man people did not talk about in public. She pushed the gate open anyway. The men noticed her before she made it 20 feet down the gravel path. 2 of them, dressed in black, positioned near the porch of a stone house that looked like it had been built to survive a war. They did not move toward her immediately, which told her something about how they operated. Controlled, patient, waiting to see what she would do before deciding what to do about her. She kept walking, past rows of apple trees with leaves curling at the edges, past fruit scattered across the grass like something had shaken the trees and never come back to collect what fell. She was cataloging problems as she walked. Root rot, most likely. Possibly fire blight, given the blackened branch tips she spotted on a tree near the wall. Whoever had planted this orchard had done it right, spaced correctly, good variety selection, but whoever had let it die had done it slowly and without understanding what was happening to it. That was when she saw him. He was sitting on the porch steps of the stone house, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped in front of him like a man waiting for news he already suspected was bad. White dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm, ink visible where the fabric fell away from his wrist, black trousers that had never seen a speck of orchard dirt in their life. His hair was dark and combed back with precision, and even sitting still he had the posture of someone who filled a room simply by choosing to occupy it. He did not look up right away. When he did, his eyes moved over her with an assessment so quick and so complete that Maya felt it like a hand pressed flat against her sternum. "This is private property," he said. His voice was low, even the kind of voice that did not need volume to carry weight. "I know," Maya said. "I let myself in anyway." Something flickered behind his eyes, not quite surprise, more like recalculation. He stood, unfolding to a height that made her tilt her chin up slightly, and the 2 men near the porch shifted their weight in a way that told her they were ready to move if he gave the smallest signal. "You're trespassing," he said. "Your trees are dying," she said back. "I'd think you have bigger problems than me walking through your gate." He studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched, but it was not an empty silence. It had weight to it, the kind that pressed down on a conversation and made every word that followed feel more deliberate. Maya had spent enough of her life being underestimated to recognize the particular quality of being looked at and measured, and she held still and let him do it, because she had not driven 4 hours to flinch now. "Who are you?" he said finally. Not a question phrased like a question. A demand dressed in fewer words than it needed. "Maya Bishop. I'm a horticulturist. I specialize in orchard restoration." She nodded toward the rows behind her. "And your orchard is dying because somebody's been treating root rot like it's a watering problem, which means it's about to get a lot worse before it gets better, unless somebody who actually knows what they're doing gets in there soon. And you're offering." "I'm offering to save it." "Yes." He came down the last 2 steps, closing some of the distance between them, close enough that she caught the scent of him, cedar and something darker underneath, smoke maybe, or the ghost of a cigarette. He did not smoke in front of strangers. His eyes were a shade of brown so dark they read as black from a few feet away, and there was a small scar through his left eyebrow, thin and old, the kind of mark that had a story nobody was going to tell her. "I don't know you," he said. "I don't know who sent you, And I don't take strangers walking onto my property with open arms, orchard or no orchard. Nobody sent me, Maya said. I heard the land was dying and nobody knew how to stop it. That was enough. You drove here for that. I drove here for that. One of the men near the porch, older, heavier through the shoulders, took a step forward like he intended to escort her back out through the gate himself. The man in the white shirt lifted 2 fingers, barely a movement, and the older man stopped where he stood. That was the first thing Maya understood about him. He did not raise his voice to be obeyed. He simply expected it, and the world around him complied. You have a name, she said, or should I keep calling you the man whose orchard is dying? The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. Daniel Cho, he said. Well, Daniel Cho, you can have me escorted off your property, and by spring you'll have lost the whole orchard, or you can let me walk it, tell you what's wrong, and decide from there whether you want my help. She shifted her duffel bag higher on her shoulder. Either way, I'm not leaving before I say what I came to say. Daniel looked past her, toward the rows of trees, something moving behind his expression that Maya could not name yet. Grief, maybe, or guilt. The kind of look a person got when they were staring at something they had let slip through their hands, and were only now understanding the cost of it. 15 minutes, he said. Then you leave, whatever you find. It was not what she had hoped for, but it was a door left open a crack, and Maya had learned a long time ago that a crack was sometimes all a person needed. She walked the first row with him a few paces behind her, flanked at a distance by the 2 men in black, and she talked as she moved, running her fingers along bark, checking the underside of leaves, crouching to press her thumb into the soil at the base of a tree that had already lost most of its fruit. This one's got fire blight, she said. See how the tips are black, like they've been scorched? That's not frost damage, that's bacterial. It spreads fast if you don't cut it back correctly, and if your groundskeeper's been pruning without sterilizing the tools between cuts, that's exactly how you'd end up with it jumping from tree to tree. We had someone maintaining the orchard, Daniel said. He left in the spring. He left you a mess. Maya moved to the next tree, dug her fingers slightly into the soil near the roots, frowned at what she felt there. And this is root rot. Your drainage is bad here. The water's pooling instead of running off, and the roots are basically drowning. You've got maybe 40% of the orchard salvageable, if somebody starts now. The rest is going to need to come out and be replanted, which is going to take a few seasons before you see real fruit again. Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching her hands move over the trees like she was reading something written in a language only she understood. You know all this by touching dirt, he said. I know all this because I spent my life learning it, Maya said. Some people read books for fun. I read soil. He almost smiled again, and this time it nearly made it all the way across his face before he caught it and put it away. They reached the end of the row, and Maya turned to face him fully. The 15 minutes she had been given clearly running out based on the way one of the men near the porch had checked his watch twice already. Here's my offer, she said. Something in his face shifted again. That same unreadable weight she had noticed earlier. My grandfather planted the first rows of this orchard, he said, and it seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her, the fact that he had said it out loud. Before any of this. Before the empire. Before the name people whisper when they think I can't hear them. He planted apple trees because he wanted something in this world that grew instead of something that was taken. What happened to him?
He died.
And I let the orchard die with him, because I didn't know how to keep either one alive. Daniel's jaw tightened, like the admission cost him something he had not planned on spending. I've let a lot of things I love die, because I didn't know how to protect them. Maya did not press him further, though she filed the words away, recognizing them for what they were. A door left open just slightly, the same crack she had used to get onto his land in the first place. I can't bring your grandfather back, she said. But I can bring his trees back. That's something. It is, Daniel said, and for the first time since she had arrived, his voice lost some of its careful control. It's more than something. He left her to her work after that, and Maya stood alone among the dying rows as the last light disappeared, thinking about a man who ran territory and fear with the same steady hand, who had just shown her, without meaning to, the one soft place buried underneath all of it. The following weeks fell into a rhythm neither of them named out loud. Maya rose before the sun to walk the rows while the dew still clung to the leaves, marking which trees needed to be pulled and which could be saved, and more often than not she found Daniel already awake, standing near the stone wall with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, watching the orchard like it was the only quiet thing left in his life. He never announced his presence. He simply appeared, and she stopped being surprised by it after the fourth morning. "You don't sleep," she said one morning, kneeling beside a tree she had marked for removal, testing the give of the trunk with her palm. "I sleep," Daniel said. "Just not much. Bad dreams or bad business. Depends on the night." She glanced up at him, and he was watching the horizon instead of her, jaw set in a way that told her the question had landed somewhere he did not want to look directly at. She let it go. She had learned quickly that Daniel Cho answered more honestly when he was not being pushed, that his guard came down slower and further when a conversation felt like it belonged to no one and had nowhere urgent to be. The two men who guarded him, she learned their names were Michael and Yusuf, had grown almost comfortable around her presence by the second week, no longer watching her like a threat, but more like a fixture that had simply always been there. Michael, the older of the two, sometimes helped her haul cut branches to the burn pile without being asked. Yusuf teased her once about talking to the trees, and she told him without missing a beat that the trees listened better than most people did, which made even Daniel, standing a few feet away, huff something close to a laugh. It was on a Tuesday, 3 weeks into her work, when the first threat arrived. Maya was pruning a row near the eastern wall when she heard raised voices from the direction of the house, sharp and unfamiliar, cutting through the usual quiet of the orchard like a blade through fabric. She set down her shears and moved toward the sound instinctively, some old survival logic in her overriding the part of her brain that told her to stay out of it. By the time she reached the edge of the property, 2 black cars had pulled up outside the gate, and 3 men she had never seen before stood near them, dressed sharper than Daniel's own men, with the particular stillness of people who had come to deliver a message rather than start a fight. Daniel stood facing them, Michael and Yusuf flanking him, his posture gone rigid in a way she had not seen before. "Tell your employer," one of the strangers was saying, "that the Han family does not appreciate territory disputes being settled through silence. He has 30 days to respond, or we respond for him." "Tell your employer," Daniel said, voice flat and cold in a way that made the hair rise on Maya's arms, "that I do not respond to threats delivered through messengers too afraid to come themselves." The stranger's eyes flicked past Daniel and landed on Maya, standing at the edge of the trees with dirt still on her hands. Something calculating passed behind his gaze, the look of a man cataloging a weakness he had not expected to find. "New addition to the household," the stranger said, tilting his chin toward her. "Interesting choice." "She's not part of this," Daniel said, and there was something in his voice Maya had not heard before, something sharper than warning, closer to a blade being drawn. "Everything near you is part of this," the stranger said, and then he smiled, an expression with no warmth in it at all, before he turned and got back into the car without another word. The 2 vehicles pulled away, gravel scattering under their tires, and the silence they left behind was worse than anything they had said. Daniel turned to her immediately, crossing the distance between them faster than she expected, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. "You shouldn't have come out here," he said. "I heard shouting near the trees I'm trying to save," Maya said. "Of course I came. That was the Han family. They've been circling territory disputes with me for months, and now they know you're here." His jaw worked, something tightly controlled fraying at the edges. "That makes you a target, whether you understand that or not." "I understand plenty," Maya said, holding her ground even as her pulse climbed. "I'm not asking you to protect me from something I walked into with my eyes open." "You didn't walk into this," Daniel said. "You walked into an orchard. This is different." "Is it? You told me what kind of house I'd be living near before I ever agreed to stay. I made my choice." She stepped closer, close enough that she caught the scent of him again, cedar and something colder underneath now, adrenaline maybe, or fear he would never admit to feeling. "I'm not leaving because some men in a car said something ugly." Something in his expression cracked, just slightly, and for a moment she saw past the careful control to something rawer underneath, something that looked almost like fear, though not for himself. "I can't lose someone else because of who I am," he said low, almost to himself. "Someone else?" Maya repeated quietly. Daniel's eyes met hers, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, the orchard around them gone still and silent, the only sound the wind moving through branches that were, slowly, beginning to heal. "There was a woman," he said finally, the words coming out like they had been locked somewhere for years and only now found a crack wide enough to escape through. "Before all this. Before I inherited what my father built. Her name was Grace. She wasn't part of this world, same as you aren't, and she thought that meant she'd be safe near me." He looked away, toward the trees, jaw tight. "She wasn't. The people I was at war with then took her to send me a message. I got to her too late." Maya's chest tightened, the weight of what he was telling her settling heavy and real. "Daniel. I don't tell people that," he said, cutting her off gently, like the words themselves were something fragile. "I don't talk about her. But I need you to understand why I'm asking you to be careful. Why I need you to be careful." "I hear you," Maya said, and she meant it, though she did not step back, did not put distance between them the way he seemed to expect her to. "But I'm not going anywhere. I told you that on the first day. I meant it then too." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, something unguarded moving behind his eyes, and when he finally spoke his voice had lost its usual precision, gone rougher, more honest. "You're either the bravest person who's ever walked onto my land," he said, "or the most reckless." "Maybe both," Maya said. "The trees don't seem to mind either way." That was the first time she saw him smile fully, unguarded, brief but real, and something in her chest turned over at the sight of it, something she was not ready to name yet, though she suspected he saw it happen on her face before she managed to school her expression back into something neutral. The days that followed carried a new tension underneath their usual rhythm, an awareness that had not existed before, present in the way Daniel found reasons to walk the orchard rows with her longer than necessary, in the way Maya caught herself watching his hands when he spoke, steady and precise, even when the subject turned dangerous. Michael and Yusuf noticed it too, exchanging glances neither of them commented on out loud, though Yusuf once made the mistake of grinning at Daniel in a way that earned him a look sharp enough to send him back to his post without another word. It was 2 weeks after the warning from the Han family that the second threat arrived, and this time it was not delivered through messengers standing politely outside the gate. Maya woke to the sound of breaking glass, sharp and sudden in the quiet of the cottage, and she was on her feet before her mind fully caught up with what was happening. She grabbed the closest heavy object, a cast iron trowel she had left by the door, and moved toward the sound with her heart slamming against her ribs, every instinct telling her to run, and every stubborn piece of her refusing to. The window near the cottage door had been shattered, and through the broken glass, she could see movement near the tree line, a shape too deliberate to be an animal. She backed toward the small kitchen, reaching for the phone Daniel had insisted she keep charged and within reach, when the door handle rattled hard enough that the frame shuddered. She did not scream. She had trained herself years ago not to freeze, not to waste precious seconds on sounds that would not help her, and instead she moved fast, sliding the heavy dresser in front of the door with strength she did not know she had until adrenaline gave it to her, and then she was dialing, fingers steady even as her breath came ragged. Daniel arrived before the call finished connecting, moving through the dark with Michael and Yusuf a step behind him, and Maya heard the sound of a struggle outside, brief and brutal, over almost before it began. When she finally pulled the dresser back and opened the door, Daniel was standing in the doorway, breathing hard, a thin line of blood at his temple, his eyes scanning her face and body for damage before he said a single word. "I'm fine," she said, before he could ask. "I barricaded the door. Whoever it was didn't get in." "That's not the point," Daniel said, and his voice shook slightly, the first crack in his composure she had ever witnessed. "The point is they got onto my land. They got to your door." "Who was it?" "Han's people. We caught one of them near the wall." His jaw was tight, his hands curled into fists at his sides. This was supposed to be a warning. They wanted you to understand what happens to things I care about. The words hung between them, heavier than either of them had intended, and Maya watched something shift behind his eyes, some careful wall he had been maintaining finally giving way under the weight of what had almost happened. "You're not going back to sleep in this cottage," he said. "Not tonight. Not until this is handled." Daniel Dash. "I'm not asking," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite command and not quite plea, something caught between the two. "I can't do this again. I can't stand outside a door too late a second time." Maya understood then, fully, what he was carrying, the weight of Grace's memory pressing against every decision he made where Maya was concerned, and something in her softened even as her pulse still raced from the danger that had just passed. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." He walked her to the main house himself, one hand hovering near her back without quite touching her, as though he needed the reassurance of her presence beside him more than she needed the protection. The room they gave her that night was near his own, close enough that she could hear him pacing the hallway long after the house had gone quiet, and she lay awake listening to the rhythm of his footsteps until finally, near dawn, they stopped outside her door. She rose and opened it before he could decide whether to knock. He stood there in the gray early light, shirt untucked, hair disheveled from hands that had clearly run through it too many times that night, and the careful control he wore like armor during the day was nowhere to be found now. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if that dresser hadn't held," he said, voice low and rough. "I keep thinking about how close I came to standing outside another door too late." "But you weren't," Maya said. "I'm right here." "I know." He looked at her, really looked, the way he had that first day in the orchard except stripped now of all the distance he had maintained since. "You are the first person in longer than I can remember who has made me feel like something other than what this world turned me into. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to have something good without it becoming another reason for someone to hurt me through it." "Maybe stop treating it like a weakness," Maya said softly, "and start treating it like something worth protecting properly." Daniel's hand came up slowly, tentatively, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his fingers rough and warm against her skin, and Maya did not pull away. "I told myself staying away from you was survival," he said. "I was lying to myself the whole time." The space between them collapsed slowly, deliberately, both of them choosing it with open eyes, and when he finally kissed her it was not soft or hesitant but certain, the kind of certainty that came from a man who had spent weeks convincing himself he could not have this and had finally stopped fighting it. Maya kissed him back with the same certainty, her hand fisting in the front of his shirt, and neither of them pulled away until the sound of Michael clearing his throat down the hallway reminded them the world had not stopped simply because they wanted it to. Daniel rested his forehead against hers, breathing unsteady, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. "This doesn't end the danger," he said finally. "The Han family isn't finished. If anything, this makes you more of a target." "I know," Maya said. "I'm not asking you to make this simple. I'm asking you to let me stand next to you while we handle it, instead of behind you." Something in his expression shifted, respect and want tangled together into something that looked almost like relief. "You're not what I expected when you walked through my gate." "Good," Maya said. "I'd hate to be predictable." The confrontation with the Han family came 4 days later, and it came fast, the way violence in that world always seemed to, without the courtesy of warning. Maya was in the orchard, checking the graft sites on the young trees she had planted to replace the ones that could not be saved, when Yusuf came running down the row, face pale, breath ragged. "They're here," he said. "The Han family. They're at the front gate, and they're not asking to talk this time." Maya's stomach dropped, but she did not freeze. She followed Yusuf back toward the house, mind already working through what she had, what tools were nearby, what the orchard itself might offer in the way of advantage. She had grown up understanding land, understanding how to use terrain, and this land, at least, she knew better than anyone. Daniel was near the front of the property when she arrived, flanked by Michael and 4 other men she recognized from the wider household, all of them armed, all of them tense in the particular way of people bracing for something that could not be avoided. Across the gate, a dozen men stood beside 3 black cars, led by the same cold-eyed stranger who had delivered the first warning weeks earlier. 30 days, the man called out. You didn't respond the way we asked. I don't take orders from men who send children to deliver threats, Daniel said, voice carrying across the distance with a coldness Maya had not heard from him before. Then we'll take what we came for, the man said, and things moved fast after that, the kind of fast that stripped away thought and left only instinct. Gunfire cracked through the orchard air, and Maya dropped low on reflex, years of nothing preparing her for a moment like this except sheer stubborn will. She saw Daniel move, fluid and precise even under fire, pulling one of his own men out of the line of a bullet's path with a control that looked almost like choreography, and she understood in that instant exactly what he had meant weeks ago about violence being a language he had been born speaking. But it was chaos, too, uncontrolled and spreading, and when she saw one of the Han family's men circling wide toward the orchard's eastern edge, clearly intending to flank Daniel's position from a blind angle, she did not think. She moved. She grabbed the heavy irrigation pipe wrench she had left near the young trees earlier that morning and cut through the row at an angle that put her directly in the path of the flanking man before he ever saw her coming. He turned, gun rising, and Maya swung the wrench with everything she had, connecting hard enough to send the weapon spinning from his grip and drop him to his knees with a sound she would remember for a long time. Maya! Daniel's voice cracked across the chaos, raw with a fear she had never heard from him, and he was moving toward her before the man on the ground had even finished falling, putting himself bodily between her and the remaining threat with a speed that left no room for hesitation. The fight ended not long after, the Han family's remaining men retreating under the combined pressure of Daniel's people and the arrival of reinforcements Michael had apparently called in the moment the gunfire started, and the cold-eyed stranger who had led the assault was among those who did not make it back to the cars. When it was over, Daniel turned to her immediately, hands framing her face, checking for injury with a desperation that made her chest ache. You could have been killed, he said, voice shaking now in a way it had not during the fight itself. You should have stayed back. You would have been flanked, Maya said, breathless, adrenaline still hot in her veins. I saw it before anyone else did. I wasn't going to just stand there and watch it happen to you. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, something breaking open behind his eyes, and then he pulled her against him, his arms tight around her, his face pressed into her hair. I have spent years making sure nothing could touch the people close to me, he said, voice muffled and raw. And you just walked directly into gunfire to protect me. That's what you do for people you love, Maya said, the words slipping out before she had fully decided to say it, and she felt him go still against her. He pulled back just enough to look at her, dark eyes searching her face like he was trying to memorize it, like he needed to be certain the word had truly been spoken and not simply imagined. Say it again, he said low. I love you, Maya said, steady this time, unafraid of the danger the words carried in a world like his. I didn't plan on it. I definitely didn't plan on falling for a man who owns 3 suits for every day of the week and an orchard he didn't know how to save. But here we are. Daniel's expression cracked fully open then, something she had never seen from him, unguarded and stripped of every careful wall he had built around himself since the day she arrived. I love you, he said back, the words rough, unpracticed, like a man speaking a language he had forgotten he knew. I have loved you since you walked through that gate and told me my trees were dying like it was the most important thing in the world. Maybe it was. The weeks that followed carried their own quiet reckoning. The Han family, weakened and exposed by the failed assault, withdrew from the territory dispute entirely within a month, choosing to cut their losses rather than continue a war that had already cost them men and standing. Daniel paid a price of his own in the aftermath. Old alliances tested, new enemies made simply by the act of surviving, but he moved through the cost with the same steady precision Maya had come to recognize as fundamentally who he was. The orchard, meanwhile, began to heal in earnest. By the time the leaves began to turn gold that fall, the rows Maya had marked for saving were thick with fruit again, apples heavy on branches that had been half dead when she first walked among them, and the young trees she had planted to replace what could not be saved stood straight and green along the eastern wall. She found Daniel there one evening, standing exactly where he had been sitting the first day she arrived, watching the orchard in the fading light. He turned when he heard her approach, and something in his face, something settled and certain that had not been there months earlier, told her everything she needed to know about how far they had both come. "Your grandfather would be proud," Maya said, coming to stand beside him, an apple heavy and red hanging from the branch nearest her hand. "I think he'd be more surprised that I let a stranger walk through my gate and take over my life," Daniel said, though there was no bite in it, only warmth. "Best decision you ever made." "Second best," Daniel said, and when she looked at him questioningly, he reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers with a certainty that had nothing hesitant left in it. "The best was not letting you leave after those 15 minutes were up." Maya laughed, the sound carrying out over rows of trees that were, finally, fully alive, and Daniel pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple that felt less like a beginning and more like a promise already being kept. "Stay," he said quietly, not a command this time, not even really a question. Just a truth spoken out loud between two people who had already chosen each other in every way that mattered. "I already did," Maya said. "I'm not planning on stopping now." The orchard stretched out before them in the last gold light of evening, alive in a way it had not been in years, proof that some things, given the right hands and enough patience, could be saved after all. If this story pulled you in, make sure you like this video, subscribe for more, and drop a comment telling me what you thought of Maya and Daniel's story. There is more where this came from, so stay close.